So I want to talk about implications for innovation research. Much of this research is focused on building on top of previous technologies, and we're thinking about sort of what is called evolutionary trajectories. This is the idea that technologies follow some sort of evolutionary path based on what knowledge is embodied within these technologies, both in terms of how you actually use them, but also the actual technology itself. There's lots of knowledge that's built into it. And the goal with a new technology is to actually just do some problem solving. So much of this research has actually been really focused on sort of successful outcomes in terms of technological success. Now, why does that actually happen? The reason is that research tends to bias towards financial profitability because we want to sort of encourage, there's two reasons for this. The first one is we want to encourage people to create profitable businesses. So there's this belief that you should just study profitable businesses because that's how you understand profitable businesses. The other thing is that it's just really hard to get information on businesses that have failed, businesses that are sort of fledgling along. People don't like to disclose that stuff because it's uncomfortable to actually do that. And now, what I am pointing out, and so if you actually did research on that, right? If you imagine what you're looking at is sort of just successful outcomes, what you're going to see is this very large bias of success. And, one of the folks that have talked a fair bit about this is Yerker Denrell, and his student, where he was sort of pointing out that there's a lot of bias towards success. And we often see how technologies do well over time, and we study that, but we don't necessarily get to see what's going on behind the scenes. And when you see the things that are going on behind the scenes, and that's why I'm really open about this whole reciprocity project, that it is not profitable at this moment, that it has been going for a long time, and it's very frustrating. I don't have time for things. I've got all sorts of other things going on, and it feels like one more thing. But, I also sort of point out the sort of humbling nature of doing these things and problem solving, where you don't necessarily know what's going on. And it would be nice to understand what is actually going on so that you could take these steps forward. But we really honestly don't know most of the time. And so you could do different tricks. For example, there's the stage gate process that we often talk about in sort of thinking about looking at an idea through sort of the stages process of things. Now that would work if you were to think about ideas on sort of a large scale and you had many different resources and different teams that were independent of each other. So a large corporation can do the sort of stage gate process where you build on top, or where you sort of select out ideas progressively as you invest more into them. But for most of us that are cobbling things together, that are doing what's called bricolage, piecing things together with sort of at your fingertips, we often don't have that luxury. And the only thing that we could do is just get up and keep trying and keep pursuing it. And now even those people that are creating the portfolio firms within that stage gate process, or the sort of many different ideas, there is a huge cost to that. And that's what we sort of forget about, is that, let's say you move 6 projects down the gates, right? You're a large corporation, you move 6 projects and then you kill 5 of them and you pick the best one at the end. What we don't realize is that there's people behind that. And that is incredibly tough to deal with, and it's not a fun experience in any sort of way, because people have spent a great deal of time and effort doing it. So, the challenge with it is thinking about the sort of interpersonal, the personal stuff, the sort of psychology of doing the stage gate process, which rarely gets talked about. And then the other thing is, those individuals are doing the same thing that I'm doing, trying to figure things out. They don't necessarily know what is the right outcomes. They don't know what is the right process to do. They are trying to problem solve. And there's some readily tools that I've talked about in the previous chapter, like A/B testing, but you often don't get that huge of returns from that, and it takes a great deal of effort, a great deal of time, and it also requires you to have a significant audience to do this A/B testing. It takes a lot of resources to get that audience. So the only thing that you could do is get up and keep playing around with things and use available tools that you have at your fingertips. That's why I've been using social media, for example. You see me a lot on social media because I had that problem of getting up and realizing that this is not working the way that I thought it would work. I thought people would sort of join and participate, and people would be excited about it because I'm helping out. The name of the game was reciprocity. That's what I called it, because I thought people would naturally give back, because that's what the literature suggested at the time. But I know that's not the case. Now I know everybody is very self-interested, and you have to build that audience, and not in a bad way. I don't want to use the sort of self-interest in a bad way. It's frustrating on my part, right? As somebody that's trying to build something, it does feel like, but on their end, they're just doing the same thing that I would do, and just prioritize and maximize their time, right? So you have to figure out, how do you build that audience? How do you connect with somebody? How do you actually resonate with what somebody else is doing so that they will actually join and participate? And that's why I use available social media tools. I never wanted to be, I'm actually a very private individual. I never wanted to do any of this kind of stuff. Although now I think this has actually been very useful for me in a lot of different ways in terms of sort of personal development. But, for the most part, I never wanted to actually be kind of this so out in the open and so many people paying attention to the sort of things I'm doing. But I have to do that to gain an audience so that you can actually do something, and people will participate on building that particular platform. It is very important to build that audience before you can do anything that's innovative. And I think that's often the thing that's being neglected within much of this research, is we only sort of look at these large corporations that are already doing very successful things, or we only talk to people that already have successful outcomes, and we get this sort of belief that this audience actually exists out there, and it's easy to sort of, you just put something out, and then, people will resonate with what you're doing. It doesn't work like that. You have to build trust. You have to get people to like you. You have to get people to know you. And then, develop that strong trust with what you're doing. And you have to do that all the time before people actually pay attention to what you're actually doing, right? And that's actually the challenge here, is not necessarily getting, it's not necessarily the problem solving and the sort of evolutionary trajectory that you have that's important, but it's getting the people, the sort of culture, the sort of larger culture, the language, whatever you want to call it, however you want to look at it, where people understand what you're talking about. And it becomes sort of something that's important in their mind. And that's why I actually think it's such an important, cognitive, emotional, and sort of behavioral thing that matters, right? That you have to find that combination where you have multiple people that are believing in this thing and they understand what you're doing. This is the idea of building something from nothing, is that nothing is the sort of, that's the going state. That's what everybody understands, right? And you have to sort of convince people and get people to sort of buy into what you're doing by continuously telling your story and having it sort of evolve over time and letting people see what you're doing, being open, all of these things, because you're building the sort of language, you're building the culture, you're building all sorts of different things that didn't exist, that wasn't there. And those elements are so vitally important, the sort of language, the culture, the audience, the sort of other side of the technological problem that is important. It's not necessarily the tools, and it's not necessarily the sort of problem solving that's important, but it is and it's not sort of, the sort of acquisition of knowledge that's important. Remember, I thought I had this sort of figured out, right? So I thought that was the sort of knowledge that I needed, but it's not the case. There's lots more that you need to understand, and it's more related to getting other people to participate, to see what you're doing, to build that something from nothing. Now, I think the sort of last contribution with the sort of the bumbling idiot theory of creating something from nothing is coming back to the idea of platforms. So there's been a huge amount of research in the last little while trying to understand different platforms like Uber, like the sort of Airbnb things, because they are such an important part, sort of business model that we have. Then people have been very interested in that. And one of the problems, and one of the sort of focus is on an existing platform that has already buyers and sellers, and sort of seeing, third parties contribute on this thing. And the challenge is actually creating that thing. It's not necessarily that this thing exists that's cool and interesting, but the challenge is actually creating this thing, creating that something that doesn't exist. Having that something appear from nothing is such a vitally important part that is not told, it's not sort of explained in very good detail in how to actually do this. So one way is to do that sort of A/B testing. That is not going to, in my experience, it's very expensive. It's sort of difficult to find this audience. Or the other perspective is to basically hack your way, do things that are somewhat more illegitimate, where you try to get people to join, right? Like tricky things, I guess, that people would not necessarily be proud about actually doing. And I've heard sort of anecdotal stories about various different platforms doing that stuff. I'm not going to mention it, but, that's the sort of going understanding, or sort of focusing on a small niche area and then building up from there. I think what is often not told and not understood is this idea of being open with the whole process so that other people can see and understand what you're doing and going through. I think telling that story in the storytelling component of it is more important. Having that relationship where you have a community that naturally evolves is more important than many of the sort of technological solutions that are actually being provided. And so that is where, or the sort of ways that we would understand how to build a platform, right? So you have to actually get people to sort of understand what it is that you're doing, why you're actually doing it. And I really like the sort of focus that Simon Sinek does is really talking about your why, talking about what it is that you're actually doing and understanding why it is that you're actually doing it. And getting that community to buy in to something that doesn't exist is such an important part. But not only buy into that something, but also having people, and this is the challenge with the other sort of prospects and the other ways of doing things, the hacking, the A/B testing, the sort of starting really on a small audience. But the idea is you're not going to have any evangelists. You're not going to have any meaning. People are not going to just start talking about things unless they actually see value, they have meaning, they get something out of this emotionally, they really sort of connect. Like, it's all that really, really soft, squishy stuff that we can't put our fingers on that is the most important part of actually building a platform. The reason why we feel emotional about, whether it's using, Airbnb or any number of different platforms that are out there is because of the experience that we actually have, the sort of squishiness that we see and building sort of connections with other people in other places. And, what's been really interesting is that if you watch some of their commercials, they actually know that. That's what they're marketing often. And that sort of community part of things, the experience part of things that's soft and squishy that you don't see. And I think we need to think about that. And I think we need to sort of stress that. How with platforms, it's not necessarily about building the platform itself. It's not about sort of getting buyers and sellers together. That is one sort of imaginary view of it, right? And that's often what it is. It's a theoretical view of building a larger community, but it's thinking about how you can get people from multiple sides and multiple perspectives to buy into something that doesn't exist. And how do you do that? It's storytelling. It's building meaning. It's building connection. It's helping to really get people to feel okay about themselves in various different ways, to be excited in life, to get something that has hidden value, that is difficult to get anywhere else. And I think, I've had to learn that as a really important lesson from doing the Reciprocity Project. It's not necessarily about any technological solutions, but it's about this meaning aspect, the creating value. It's all these other things that are left untold. One of the things I wanted to add to this is the understanding that anybody can innovate and do innovative products as long as they reduce the barriers in their life such that they can feel like they're actually innovative, right? So the idea is much of innovation, in my view, is social norms violations. And we are doing things to make our life better in various different ways. And so if we realize that we're just doing a slight social norm violation and we downplay it. We're not so serious about it. And we simply just realize that, hey, we're just actually playing around. And we get used to this idea that play, that wasting resources, that just kind of doing things for sheer pleasure is a remarkable driver of innovation. So there's this idea, and I think this is another implication, not only sort of the traditional understanding of innovation research, but and platforms, but also the sort of free innovation, the crowdsourcing idea. So free innovation evolved out of this idea of crowdsourcing. So crowdsourcing was a sort of literature where people were interested in, and still really active part of innovation research, and looking at why people participate on platforms where they can contribute freely, and what might motivate them to contribute freely, and understand why they actually want to participate in that kind of endeavor. And there's been lots of research in this area. Eric von Hippel has been sort of pushing this agenda for a long time and doing a good job of and his students and his sort of vast array of students is doing some really good research in this area. Henry Chestebro has done some really good research in this area as well, sort of in the open innovation side, more on the corporate innovation side of things. And the idea is that we need to incorporate users, we need to get people to sort of participate in the innovation process freely in various different ways. And so what I'm actually pointing out here is that a huge reason why people actually might not innovate. And the one sort of extension on this is the free innovation side of it, which is an interesting idea of looking, or household innovation, where people, and Eric von Hippel has a book on free innovation, and some papers on household innovation, where people just innovate for the heck of it. And there's a lot of innovation that happens where innovation is occurring in people's houses, but we're not commercializing that in various different ways. And so I want to point out that innovation is often doesn't occur because one of the primary reasons I discovered with Reciprocity Project is people are very, very self-interested, but in their own, in kind of a positive way, in the sense that they're economizing on their resources, right? Which is more like the original sort of style of research, sort of economic style, and understanding why people do these things. Now, on my side, I would sort of point out, in one of the sort of rationales within this area is why people are curious in this. Why do we actually innovate and create things? I want to point out that it's not necessarily about sort of altruism, right? So I am guided towards, thinking of, can this be sold one day? Is there sort of a profitable area in this sort of endeavor, reciprocity? I don't know at this point. It's too uncertain. There's too much going on in terms of making sense of it. But the key thing is to think about not taking yourself so seriously, right? I think if we move beyond the sort of altruism and the sort of moral understanding, and we say, hey, what if we look on the other side, instead of a moral understanding, we just say, like, a normative thing, that if we just do social norm violations and we just kind of encourage goofing around for play's sake, and there's no sort of moral, it's not altruistic. It may be altruistic, right? There might be one perception of it. If that's what I'm sort of looking at with the Reciprocity Project, is this sort of altruism, and me doing something that is somewhat altruistic to encourage other people to pay it forward. Well, that died. That did not work, right? The idea behind that did not work. But what I do strongly believe is that we can create platforms in such a way that we can incentivize people to behave in sort of a behavioral science kind of way, in a certain way, to encourage them to give back and to do good things, right? I think about a lot of platforms that do this, right? So you think about Facebook. Why do people actually contribute on Facebook? It's because they feel that they're getting something from that. They don't feel it's necessarily altruistic, although some people do in terms of contributing on there, but people contribute because they're getting something from that in a very self-interested way, right? So in the sense with the Reciprocity Project, what I've sort of realized is that you need to sort of have that sort of self-interest, practical way of understanding people. They're not altruistic, right? They're just self-interested doing their thing. And if you sort of figure out what are the not necessarily rewards, but figure out like why they might actually do something, and sort of join a community in the sense that this resonates with them. This is something that makes sense to them. That there are stories that they understand. Like I think if we think of it in that way, it is a far different perspective. It's not necessarily altruism. People are incentivized to do their thing in sort of a practical sense, like as if you're building a platform, but also, are participating on a platform like Facebook. We're all pretty sort of self-interested in why we actually want to participate, but we do it because we want the sort of community, or we feel like we're accepted. This is a lot less on the sort of much of that research is very econ oriented and driven from kind of like a engineering econ perspective. But this is, hey, why don't we think about sort of psychological mechanisms and sociological mechanisms? Things like, sort of why Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for example, why we might participate in something. Things like, emotional well-being, the sort of cognitive, emotion, and sort of behavioral aspects of things. And when we get those tied in, then we can start developing a community. And what is important behind those elements is clearly language. It's clearly people resonating or understanding that it actually appeals to them. Right, there's a lot that goes on that is more sort of on the softer side that I think is critically important that we have not addressed. And it's not altruism. It's not sort of the 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 sort of bigger aspects of in the sense of why people actually do things, but it's very much a psychological and a sociological reason why they participate in communities, why they feel sort of part of something, is that they have acceptance, for example, that they feel that there's other people like them, that they feel that they're getting self-actualization. Those are very sociological processes, but also or very psychological processes, but also somewhat sociological, right? We like to be part of groups, and thinking about why we might sort of form groups and be part of groups is a very, very important part of how you might actually build something like the Reciprocity Project. And that's what I've learned. It's not technological solutions. It's not sort of incentives or motivations or anything like that. But that's only a really small parts of the puzzle. But it's thinking about, how do you work backwards in terms of backwards and duck, that, hey, if I wanted to be part of a community, what would I want? I would want to feel loved. I would want to feel accepted. I would want to get acknowledgement. I want to feel empowered. Like all of these things are very much on the sociological side, where people want to participate in various different ways, right? Where they don't want to necessarily see, power differentials as much, right? Like they want to feel comfortable with speaking out. All of these things are the reasons why I strongly believe why communities form and why people actually participate and why they actually want to engage, is that they fundamentally feel sort of empowered, and they feel part of a community. They feel that they can speak up. They feel acknowledged. They feel all sorts of these stories that that frankly are not being told in the literature, right? They're being told, sort of washed over, that these things are not necessarily important, right? So if you want to build a bunch of broken software that doesn't function over the long run, that's what you focus on, is technological solutions and sort of incentives, which, yeah, you get, somebody gets sort of this instant high, and they participate for a brief moment, but then that thing dies out, right? If you look at things that have staying power, sort of platforms that have staying power, they have this sort of really strong part of, hey, I feel empowered. I feel like I'm being accepted. I feel, psychological safety, as Amy Edmondson points out. I feel like I'm part of a team. I'm part of something that is bigger than I am, which is really sociological. And why we actually might want to participate is very deeply ingrained. That sort of power of belonging and power of, um, why we do things as human beings. It's much more than just a simple thing of, like, these, we're incentivized to do these things. We have these financial rewards to do these things. I don't think that's the case at all. I think those systems that sort of design in that way, and that's how the reciprocity project sort of started, is a sort of technical, incentive driven, motivation driven kind of style. And I've evolved towards telling a story about me being a complete bumbling idiot and not knowing how to do anything, but helping people realize that they are part of, they are also a bumbling idiot. Right? If you look at me on paper, I'm good on paper. Like, I've got this, I'm an engineer, and went to good schools, and I have a PhD and all this kind of. I haven't got a freaking clue what I'm actually doing, and I'm making crap up. So there's something that feels good with knowing that you're not the only one that is doing that similar thing, and that you really don't know what you're doing as well. And feeling that, hey, there's other people in this world that are just making crap up too. And I think that's where the sort of bumbling idiot story is super important, is realizing that we're all making this stuff up. We don't know what we're really doing. And that, the sort of presumption that we have this, like, clear path that's all laid out, and we just sort of follow that in the sort of rational decision making perspective, often just does not hold very well in terms of what real life feels like. It might be true if you sort of abstract over many different individuals, but my own personal experience, that doesn't feel like how I actually make decisions. I don't sit there and fret about different alternatives. I kind of just make crap up as I go, or make shit up as I go, and then see what actually happens as I sort of pursue these things. And then hopefully it actually works. And if it works, great. But I don't know what the right course of action is. I don't even know what the course of action is going forward. I couldn't even tell you what that looks like. And it's kind of fun to, make sense of, people ask me what the reciprocity project is. Well, I kind of have to do the sort of, backwards introspection of what this is and try to make shit up so that other people can understand it. And I just don't know really, I don't have a clear sense anymore of what it is, in the sense. And that the reason is that, the audience, the community matters a lot, right? It's more than just me. It's more than just me sort of making up the sort of technological solutions. It is a community thing. There's lots of people that are involved, in the sense that it's a amorphous group process that, yes, it's being orchestrated and led by myself. And, I've got, developers that are sort of, doing what is called the, doing owner manager kind of structure, right? Where I sort of tell developers what I would like, but at the same time, it's a sort of made up thing, right? That I don't know what we would really like, and we see what actually sticks. If it sticks, great. I wish that there was a better process. I've studied all sorts of stuff, and I don't know what that process is. I've tried the A/B testing. It's really expensive. And for the sort of day to day, it doesn't work that well. It doesn't explain what's going on for me. All right, so Thanks so much for listening. And I think that those are the real big implications for innovation research at this point. And that is just not, it's just not understood. It's not clear in terms of what is going on behind the scenes. I wanted to add one more thing that I was just thinking about. And the reason is why it feels like you're making things up is that you don't know where the opportunities are going to be created and where they're going to sort of develop. And, to give you an example of this, when you're doing things that are on social media, for example, you don't know who's actually paying attention, who's the audience that is actually there, and what's going to happen. And this has happened to me many, many times now, is that people I've never heard of, or I don't know, or, I've never bumped into in real life, and I have no real direct connection with them. They, every once in a while, will reach out and they'll say, hey, did you try this? Or did you do this? And these opportunities sort of arrive in weird and sort of happenstance ways that you would never expect. There's a lot more serendipity involved and a lot more chance and randomness involved than we sort of allow for and make sense of. And I think that's where, the sort of idea of randomness and chance and serendipity, as I talked about in early chapters of this book, I think is an important part to think about, in that there really is not the sort of strategic decision-making direction that a lot of people think about, in the sense that you sort of have this strong path in terms of where things are going to go. But instead, it's a sort of combination of, being present, making opportunities sort of happen, and just kind of being okay with changes and things that sort of evolve. Sometimes it's super uncomfortable and weird, but that does happen. And we have to be less strategic in the sense that we have this sort of very fixed path that is fixed in terms of the decision-making framework that we have, and sort of be present and be okay when things actually happen that you would never expect, as this alarm is going off right now. All right, take care. Have a wonderful day.